NFL training camps have turned into complete chaos. In just 1 week, 7 star players went down with injuries, leaving teams scrambling before the preseason even begins. So who got hurt? How serious are the injuries? And which teams just took the biggest hit? I've got the details, so let me break it down. Training camp opened with the usual optimism. Then, inside of about 7 days, 7 significant players hit the turf and didn't get back up the same way they went down. Start in New Orleans. The Saints opened camp on a Wednesday, and defensive tackle Bryan Bresee worked with the first unit in 11-on-11 drills. Nothing unusual until he planted on a pass rush move and his knee buckled. No contact, no collision, just a plant step that ended his season before it started. The injury occurred during the Saints' first practice of training camp at their facility in Metairie, and Bresee worked with the first unit in 11-on-11 drills during that practice. His own teammate, nose tackle Davon Godchaux, described it about as plainly as you can. First day, it was like a freak accident. Hardly wasn't even any contact. Just really was a pass rush move and he felt his knee buckle. Days later, head coach Kellen Moore confirmed the fear was real. Season-ending ACL surgery. A 24-year-old former first-round pick done before week 1 even had a date on the calendar. Same week, different state, same gut punch. In Cincinnati, Bengals defensive end Shemar Stewart went down on a Wednesday practice and had to be carted off. He suffered a left leg injury at training camp practice on Wednesday and was carted off the field. While the severity of the injury has yet to be determined, Stewart underwent imaging and was later spotted in a leg brace and on crutches. The image alone, a 22-year-old former first-rounder wheeled off on a cart, was enough to make an entire fan base hold its breath. Meanwhile, in Carolina, the Panthers were dealing with their own trench casualty. Edge rusher Nick Scorton, just a second-year player, but already penciled in as a core piece of the pass rush, tore his ACL in the team's very first practice. The first was second-year edge rusher Nick Scorton, who suffered a torn ACL during Carolina's first practice over the weekend. One practice, gone for the year. Out west, the 49ers had already been bracing for injury trouble on defense, but the blow that really stung came on offense. Wide receiver Ricky Pearsall, a player San Francisco had leaned on the year before, is now facing season-ending knee surgery. San Francisco 49ers wide receiver Ricky Pearsall will undergo knee surgery and miss the entire 2026 season. General manager John Lynch announced on Saturday. For a receiver room already thin, that's not a minor subtraction. That's a hole. Then there's Philadelphia. Defensive back CJ Gardner-Johnson gave everyone a scare when he had to be helped off during a camp session, carted to the locker room in a moment that looked far worse than it turned out to be. Despite being carted to the locker room, ESPN reports that Gardner-Johnson merely suffered a lower calf strain, so he avoided any serious injury. And Johnson, 28, was enjoying a solid start to training camp. The relief was real, but so was the scare, and so was the practice time lost. Kansas City had its own moment of panic when receiver Xavier Worthy banged up his shoulder. The initial read from insiders wasn't catastrophic, but nobody was breathing easy. NFL insider Ian Rappaport described Worthy as being believed to be okay, but we want to see him back on the practice field before relaxing. A shoulder injury to a receiver who lives on contested catches and quick separation is the kind of thing teams watch closely, even when the early word is good. And rounding out the 7, Carolina again, this time on the other side of the ball. Rookie receiver Chris Brazzell too went from a promising camp debut to a devastating diagnosis in a matter of days. Brazzell suffered a moderate LCL tear in his left knee and is expected to miss up to 8 weeks, and was selected by the Panthers in the 3rd round of the 2026 NFL Draft. Competing alongside Tet McMillan, Jalen Coker, and Xavier Legette in a crowded wide receiver room. Actually, the situation escalated further than that initial 8-week projection. The team ultimately opted for surgery. Panthers rookie wide receiver Chris Brazzell, too, will undergo season-ending surgery on his torn LCL, with the team and Brazzell viewing surgery as the best course of action. 7 players, 7 different teams, 7 different injuries, torn ligaments, carts, braces, crutches, imaging appointments, all inside a single stretch of practices before a single preseason whistle had even blown. The return of football also brings with it the return of injuries. And not only have a large handful of players begun training camp on either the PUP or NFI list, but others have already suffered ailments throughout this week's first wave of practices. It's the kind of week that makes beat writers stop covering position battles and start tracking MRI results instead. And it's only the beginning of the story, because each one of these injuries didn't just affect one player. It rippled through entire depth charts, shifted entire team plans, and in some cases reshaped how a franchise has to think about its whole season. So let's break down exactly how bad the damage runs, position group by position group, starting with the group that got hit hardest of all, the trenches. If you wanted to draw a line connecting the worst injuries of the week, it runs straight through the defensive line. 3 of the 7, Bresee, Stewart, and Scourton, all play in the box, all anchor pass rush plans, and all went down doing exactly the kind of movement that made them valuable in the first place. Start with Bresee, because his situation says the most about how fast a season can flip. He wasn't a fringe roster piece. He was a 2023 first-round pick who become one of the anchors of Brandon Staley's defensive front. Bresee's absence creates an immediate problem for a defense preparing for its second season in coordinator Brandon Staley's system, as the 24-year-old was projected to remain one of the primary players along New Orleans' 3-man front. He'd started nearly every game he'd played the year before. Bresee started all 15 games he played during the 2025 season. The Saints didn't just lose a body. They lost the guy the whole interior rotation was built around, and the timing made it worse. New Orleans had just picked up his 5th-year option a few months earlier, betting on him as a long-term piece. New Orleans exercised the 5th-year option on his rookie contract during the offseason, keeping the 2023 first-round pick under team control through 2027, an option worth approximately $13.9 million and guaranteed. Now that investment sits on the shelf for a full year, while 2 unproven names, Vernon Broughton and Christian Miller, get thrown into the fire. Broughton and Boyd should now receive more opportunities during camp, while the coaching staff determines whether an outside addition is necessary. And New Orleans could distribute Bresee's snaps across several players, rather than asking one inexperienced lineman to assume his entire role. It even puts more pressure on the edge group. Guys like Cameron Jordan and Chase Young now need to generate pressure without an interior presence collapsing the pocket next to them. The injury also places more pressure on the Saints' edge defenders, as Cameron Jordan, Carl Granderson, and Chase Young may need to generate a greater share of the defense's pressure without Bresee attacking from inside. There's a cruel symmetry to it too. This isn't Bresee's first time losing a season to this exact injury. Back at Clemson, years before he was even drafted, he tore the same ligament in the same way. Bresee previously tore his left ACL at the beginning of his 2021 season at Clemson. A player who fought his way back from that once now has to do it all over again, except this time it's costing him an NFL season instead of a college one. Then there's Cincinnati. Shemar Stewart's path into this week was already complicated before he ever got hurt. He'd spent the summer before as a rookie locked in a contract standoff, missing time before finally signing. After a public standoff last summer saw the Bengals' 2025 first-round pick finally sign his contract in late July. Stewart played in just 8 games as a rookie as he dealt with both ankle and knee injuries. So when he went down again in year 2, carted off, imaging ordered a brace on his leg. It read like a continuation of a run of bad luck rather than a one-off. He suffered a left leg injury at training camp practice on Wednesday and was carted off the field. And while the severity of the injury has yet to be determined, Stewart underwent imaging and was later spotted in a leg brace and on crutches. The good news arrived a couple days later, and it mattered. Reports out of Cincinnati said the injury, while it looked brutal in the moment, wasn't the ligament tear everyone feared. Bengals defensive end Shemar Stewart only suffered a hyperextended knee, with the belief being no ligament damage for Stewart, according to ESPN's Adam Schefter and Ian Rappaport. That's the difference between missing a season and missing a few weeks. But the Bengals had already spent significant resources fortifying that defensive front, bringing in Boye Mafe and Jonathan Allen, trading for Dexter Lawrence, precisely because they needed Stewart's growth to matter. The Bengals did their part this offseason to bolster their defensive front, signing both Boye Mafe and Jonathan Allen in free agency, and trading for Dexter Lawrence II from the Giants. Every practice he misses recovering is development time lost at exactly the point in his career where he needed reps the most. And then Carolina, where the story is grimmer because there's no good news caveat attached. Nick Scouton wasn't just a rotational piece. He was supposed to be a foundational part of a pass rush the Panthers had been trying to rebuild for years. He tore his ACL in the team's very first practice of the summer. 1 rep, gone for the year. Preseason games will give the first live look at how battles like Cleveland's quarterback competition and Carolina's pass rush, now thinner after Skirton's injury, are shaping up heading into Week 1. That's the brutal math of training camp. A defense can spend months building a scheme around a specific piece, and one practice can erase it before the group ever plays a real game together. What ties all three of these injuries together isn't just the position group, it's the timing. None of them happened in a preseason game where you can at least point to contact, to a hit, to bad luck against an opponent. These happened in practice, against your own teammates, in drills you run every single training camp, in movements these players have made 10,000 times in their careers. That's what makes it so unsettling for coaches and front offices. There's no scheme adjustment that prevents a plant step from going wrong. There's no drill you can cut to make it safer. It's the sport itself, catching up with 3 defensive linemen in the same week. And while the trenches were absorbing all of that, the receiver rooms across the league were about to take their own hit. A different kind of damage, but just as costly to the season ahead. If the defensive line carnage was about power and collapse, the skill position damage this week was about speed. Receivers whose value comes from explosiveness, and what happens when that explosiveness gets interrupted at the worst possible time. Start in San Francisco, because Ricky Pearsall's situation carries weight beyond just one player. The 49ers came into this camp already managing a mountain of injury questions on defense. Nick Bosa working back from a torn ACL. Michael Williams doing the same after going down just 6 weeks later. Nick Bosa was one of countless 49ers to suffer season-ending injuries early in 2025. And because his knee issue occurred in Week 3, he had nearly all year to work through his rehab, setting him up to play right out of the gate. But 6 weeks after Bosa tore his ACL, his young position mate, Michael Williams shouldered a heavy load as a rookie, starting all 9 games before his promising debut campaign came to a premature end with the same injury. That's a defense that spent all offseason trying to just get back to full strength. Then, right as camp opened, the offense took its own hit when general manager John Lynch had to step in front of cameras and announce Pearsall was done for the year. San Francisco 49ers wide receiver Ricky Pearsall will undergo knee surgery and miss the entire 2026 season, General Manager John Lynch announced on Saturday. A team already trying to climb back after finishing last in defensive success rate now has to replace offensive production too. The San Francisco 49ers continue rebuilding their defense after finishing last in defensive success rate last season, while also managing multiple injury concerns entering camp. It doesn't stop there for San Francisco's skill positions either. Tight end George Kittle, one of the most productive players at his position in the league, isn't even ready to practice as camp winds down. He's opening the year on the physically unable to perform list, recovering from an Achilles issue. Kittle isn't even ready to practice by the end of training camp and opens the regular season on the PUP list, which would require him to miss at least the first 4 games, but could lead to a lengthier absence, though Kittle probably will return at some point in 2026. Add Pearsall's season-ending surgery to that, and the 49ers passing game is trying to function with 2 of its most trusted weapons unavailable to start the year. Move over to Carolina, and the story compounds an already brutal week for that franchise. Rookie receiver Chris Brazzell, too, had actually been fighting through soreness earlier in camp, before this new injury hit, a completely separate issue from whatever had been nagging him previously. Person added that the injury is unrelated to the earlier knee issue the wide receiver was dealing with that caused him to miss several practices due to soreness. He was a 3rd-round pick, someone the Panthers were counting on to push for reps in a crowded room that already included established names. Brazzell was selected by the Panthers in the 3rd round of the 2026 NFL Draft and is competing alongside Ted McMillan, Jalen Coker, and Xavier Legette in a crowded wide receiver room in Carolina. Instead of pushing for reps, he's now recovering from surgery, and Carolina, a team already down its top pass rush addition from the same week, is left picking up pieces on both sides of the ball. Just 1 day after reporting for his 4th NFL training camp, Brian Bressy's season may already be over. A similar gut punch echoing across the league that same week. Then there's Kansas City, where the scare came with better news attached, but real tension all the same. Xavier Worthy's emergence had been one of the stories of the offseason, a burner who forces safeties to respect every route. When he came up holding his shoulder, the whole building paused. The update that followed offered relief without eliminating concern. NFL insider Ian Rappaport described Worthy as being believed to be okay. But until he's back on the practice field, in addition to this positive injury news that Xavier Worthy's shoulder is believed to be okay, teams don't fully exhale. For a team that had already watched its quarterback, Patrick Mahomes, go down the year before with a serious knee injury and spend the offseason grinding back, another scare at a skill position was the last thing Kansas City needed. The Chiefs watched their 2025 postseason hopes end when Patrick Mahomes went down with a knee injury in the Week 15 loss to the Chargers. And tearing both ligaments generally makes the recovery timeline longer than that for an ACL tear alone. Though Mahomes has been on or ahead of schedule all offseason. What makes this stretch of receiver injuries different from the defensive line carnage is what it does to a passing game's chemistry. A quarterback spends the entire offseason building timing with specific targets, knowing exactly where a guy breaks on a slant, how fast he separates on a comeback, when he'll adjust his route to a coverage look. Losing a piece like Pearsall or Brazzell doesn't just remove a name from the depth chart. It resets that timing from scratch, right as the season clock starts ticking. And it puts pressure on the next man up, young, unproven players who now have to be ready for a role they didn't expect to fill this early, in front of a fan base that's already anxious after a week of nothing but bad news. That's the theme running under every single one of these injuries. It's never just about the player who goes down. It's about who has to step up, how fast they can get ready, and whether the whole operation around them can adjust before the games start counting. Which brings the story to the players who did come back, the ones the panic missed, and the way one single week reshaped how entire coaching staffs are approaching the rest of camp. Not every scare from this stretch ended in surgery. Some players walked the tightrope and came out the other side. But even the good news cases tell you something about how fragile a training camp roster really is, and how fast good news can flip into bad. CJ Gardner-Johnson is the clearest example. Getting carted to the locker room is one of the scarier sights in sports. It usually means something's broken or torn. Philadelphia held its breath. Then the imaging came back, and it wasn't the disaster it looked like. Despite being carted to the locker room, ESPN reports that Gardner-Johnson merely suffered a lower calf strain, so he avoided any serious injury, and Johnson, 28, was enjoying a solid start to training camp. A calf strain still costs practice time. It still disrupts a defensive back's conditioning right as padded practices ramp up. But it's not a season for a defense that's already dealing with plenty of question marks. Getting Gardner-Johnson back in weeks instead of months is the kind of break a team needs after absorbing hit after hit. Cincinnati got a similar reprieve with Stewart. The card everyone feared, torn ligament, surgery. A lost year for a young defensive lineman who'd already battled injuries as a rookie. Didn't come. Bengals defensive end Shemar Stewart only suffered a hyperextended knee, with the belief being no ligament damage for Stewart, according to ESPN's Adam Schefter and Ian Rappaport. It's a real distinction. A hyperextension heals. A torn ligament ends seasons and sometimes reshapes careers. Stewart gets to keep building toward the player Cincinnati thought they were drafting, instead of starting that process over in 2027. But for every player who dodged the worst outcome, there's a name still sitting in limbo, recovering from injuries that predate this specific week, but that hang over the season all the same, adding to the sense that this camp has been unusually unkind to star talent across the league. Patrick Mahomes is rehabbing a serious knee injury from the year before, and while ahead of schedule, still isn't a guarantee for Week 1. Big names like Patrick Mahomes and Malik Nabers are among those on recovery watch, as it is no guarantee that they are ready to suit up in Week 1, though players on the mend offered updates on their situations earlier this summer at OTAs and minicamp. Giants receiver Malik Nabers has actually surprised people with how far ahead of schedule he looks. Malik Nabers, we've gone back and forth all offseason on his health, but turns out he feels better than expected, having practiced last week for the first time since his torn ACL, and apparently having been running routes prior to camp. Green Bay's Tucker Kraft, who tore his own ACL mid-season the year before, has been cleared to return to practice, and is chasing a Week 1 return of his own. Tucker Kraft was removed from the PUP list last week and returned to practice for the first time since suffering a torn ACL midway through last season. And while he still has a lot of work to do, he has a shot to be out there for Week 1. These aren't new injuries from this specific week, but they matter to the bigger picture because they show just how many star players across the league are walking into the season on a countdown clock instead of full health. Add the fresh names from this week: Brezzy Stewart, Scarton, Pearsall, Gardner Johnson, Worthy, Brazzell, to a list that already included Mahomes, Neighbors, Kraft, and Kittle, and you start to see just how thin the margin for error has become for teams trying to build a complete roster heading into September. It's not just the star names either. Beneath every one of these injuries sits a domino effect of roster moves nobody predicted a month ago. Upwards of 40 NFL players began training camp on the physically unable to perform list this week, each ineligible to practice until they pass a physical and are activated, and injuries have created initial opportunities for rookies from the 2026 draft class. Every star who goes down opens a door for somebody else, an undrafted free agent, a late-round pick, a career backup who's been waiting years for exactly this kind of break. Carolina had already been counting on a rookie tackle to step into a starting role after an offseason injury to their line. The Carolina Panthers drafted Monroe Freeling with the intention of having him play a reserve role as a rookie and signed Rasheed Walker in free agency because they knew starting left tackle Ikem Ekwonu had a long recovery road ahead of him after suffering a torn patella. Now, after Scourton and Brazzell both went down in the same camp, that same coaching staff has even less margin to work with heading into the season. That's the part that doesn't always make the highlight reel. Every single one of these 7 injuries doesn't just cost a team a player. It costs them a plan. Depth charts built over months of free agency and draft evaluation get rewritten overnight. Coordinators who spent the offseason designing packages around a specific skill set now have to improvise with whoever's left standing. And for the players stepping into those roles, it's the kind of opportunity that can make a career or expose exactly why they were third on the depth chart to begin with. Which leaves one final piece of this story: what happens next? Not just for the 7 players themselves, but for the teams now staring down a season that already looks different than it did a week ago. 7 players, 7 torn plans. And now, the hardest part, figuring out what a franchise does with a season that already looks completely different from the one it drew up in March. Start with the recovery timelines, because they tell you everything about how each team's year just changed. Brissett is done, full stop. Season-ending surgery means the Saints spend all of 2026 developing Broughton and Miller in real games instead of practice reps, hoping one of them can approximate what Brissett was becoming. Broughton and Boyd should now receive more opportunities during camp, while the coaching staff determines whether an outside addition is necessary. Scourton is done too. A pass rush Carolina had been quietly building now has to find answers from players who weren't supposed to carry that load yet. Brazzell's season ends with him watching from the sideline in a crowded receiver room he was supposed to be fighting his way into. Pearsall's absence means San Francisco enters the year leaning even harder on names like Brandon Ayuk and whoever else steps up in that room, all while still nursing questions about Kittle's Achilles. Then there's the group still writing their story in real time. Stewart's hyperextension gives him a path back this season, but it costs him reps in a defensive front that Cincinnati spent real draft capital and free agency money building around him. Gardner Johnson's calf strain is a matter of weeks, not months, which for Philadelphia is as close to good news as this stretch produced. And Worthy's shoulder, if the early word holds, might end up being the one true dodge of the whole week, a player who scared an entire fan base for a day or two before walking it back to full health. What ties this all together isn't just bad luck, it's the calendar. The NFL training camp is underway for all teams as players gear up for the upcoming season. And as seen every year, players have begun to get hurt in training camps, with fans also starting to panic about their team's star players getting hurt. Every single year, camp produces this exact anxiety, but rarely does it produce 7 significant names inside one single stretch of practices, spread across 7 different franchises, hitting nearly every position group at once. Trenches, receivers, secondary. It touched almost every unit that makes a roster complete. And for the fans of these 7 teams, the frustration isn't just about one player, it's about timing. These aren't mid-season injuries where a team can adjust on the fly with weeks of film to study. These happened before a single preseason snap, before coaches even had a real look at what their rotations would become. That means every one of these teams now has to build a plan B during the exact window that was supposed to be for finalizing plan A. The next major inflection point is padded practices, when position battles typically start producing real separation rather than off-season projection, and preseason games will follow shortly after. giving the first live look at how battles like Cleveland's quarterback competition and Carolina's pass rush, now thinner after Scarton's injury, are shaping up heading into Week 1. There's also a human cost that doesn't show up on an injury report. Bresee tearing the same ligament he tore back in college. Stewart going down again after already losing time to injuries as a rookie. Brazzell, a rookie barely into his first NFL camp, already facing surgery before he'd played a single real game. These are careers, not just roster spots. Players who spent years working toward this exact opportunity, watching it get interrupted by something as simple as a plant step or an awkward landing. For the teams left picking up the pieces, the next few weeks matter more than they would in a normal camp. Preseason games, usually treated as low-stakes evaluation, now carry extra weight. Every rep for the backups stepping into vacated roles is a genuine audition, not a formality. The next major inflection point is padded practices, when position battles typically start producing real separation rather than off-season projection. And preseason games will follow shortly after. Coaches who spent March and April building schemes around specific personnel now have to find out, in real time, whether their depth is actually deep enough to survive a season, because this week already proved it doesn't take much for a plan to fall apart. That's where the story sits right now. 7 players down in a single stretch, some for the year, some for weeks, all of them reshaping what their teams thought September was going to look like. The rest of camp and the preseason that follows will decide just how much of that damage each franchise can actually absorb before the games that count begin.